recording. Thank you very much. Brian, any other introduction that you would like to do, Brian Archer, of yourself or what you do before you get started with your presentation?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. This is, as Gary mentioned, Brian Archer, veterinary medical officer, EMRS staff specialist. Work out of Central Kansas, and I have primary coverage for districts 4 and 5. 2 colleagues, of course. Shelley Phillips has districts 1 and 2, and Dr. Kami Johnson has districts 3 and district 6. So that's kind of how we have it split up a little bit. If you have questions and you need some assistance, you can give us a call. With that being said, I was asked this morning to talk a little bit about composting information and how we manage that in the EMRS, kind of let you guys know the information we need to capture for the sit rep and that type of thing. So I'll just dive right in and we'll get started. I'm going to see here if we can't share the screen and go from there. Make sure this is going to work right. What screen? Are you guys seeing the EMRS screen now, I hope?
Yep.
Yep.
Yes, we are.
Okay, good. Good. So logged into the home screen here on EMRS, and the first thing I want to point out to everybody is right here in the center are our network associates that we have across the country in each district. So if you ever have questions with the EMRS or just need some assistance or want a little bit more training or want to know where to go find something, these are the folks you can reach out to. And the way it works is you reach out to them, and then if they have trouble or hitting a problem, they reach out to Cami, Shelley, or I. And of course, you're always welcome to reach out to us too. But before I go any further, I just want to mention right now, this is the way EMRS looks. This is the current 2011 Microsoft CRM version. We're going to be moving to the 2016 version, hopefully within about the next month. And it's going to look a little bit different. The functionality is going to increase, but the basic steps and how you navigate are the same. You just go a few different places to click a few different buttons. And so there'll be more information coming out about that here in just about a month. But so don't wig out when you see it looks a little bit different. But it'll be the same process as what you're used to now. But we're going to go specifically to composting information. We're not going to go into anything else unless anybody has any questions. One of the things I want to be sure to point out here right from the start is when you log into the home page, when you click on the home application, which is where we start up, there's the training materials entity. When you click on that training materials entity, all the training materials we have in EMRS will load for you. And you'll note that one of them right here is called the HPAI Toolkit. And this is one that really like folks to become familiar with and know it's there and take a look at it from time to time. And just review this toolkit. When you click on it and open it, you'll see that it is for HPAI training and reference materials. Multiple documents are attached primarily for an incident type response. And so as you scroll down, you start to see all these attachments that are in here. Okay, from a HPAI sit rep for plans folks, data entry of incident contracts and that type of thing. But there's a couple that I want to specifically show you folks. Scrolling on down here a little bit, plans, naming conventions. But here we have a disposal inspection report that is non-fillable and another one that is fillable. One of the things I'm hoping this group can kind of lead me towards is what documents this group has finalized or planned on for all IMTs to use for loading up an EMRS, because I'm going to show you a couple of different ones right now that are being used. It seems like each time an IMT deploys, there's a different form they use, and that's really okay, provided that we get the consistent information we need. But I'll just show you what one of these forms looks like. When you double click it, you have a window open up, ask you if you want what you want to do. Well, you can either save it to your hard drive or you can open it. I'll just open this one. And this is a document. This was the non-fillable one I clicked on. That basically shows the information that we're keeping track of when we're doing some composting or otherwise disposing of primarily, of course, poultry. So this is a record that could be filled out and entered in to EMRS by the field staff as the work is done on the premises. So that's one of the forms that we've been seeing come into the IMTs. I'll show you the other one here in just a minute. The other thing I really want you guys to be aware of, and all these documents, depending on what section you're in or what section you're assigned to, I mean, assuming most of you will be composting folks, but as we all know, you have a tendency to float around based on need. There's a lot of documents in here that can really help you out. But one I really want everybody to be aware of is this EMRS Quick Reference Guide. I'm going to open it real quick. This document is basically a start to finish on what occurs on an infected premises, and then what critical details or what information we need to capture in EMRS. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So for example, when we have an increased morbidity or mortality event or a positive AI screening event, what happens? Well, the DRO creates a suspect clinical case, and it progresses then as we go through. Once that suspect clinical becomes positive from a non-lab, then they close that status and create a presumptive HPAI, et cetera, et cetera. Once that presumptive is confirmed in MVSL, the presumptive is closed and the confirmed is open status. Talks about creating our flock plan statuses, IP control areas, tally sheets, quarantines, all the way down through this document, clear to the appraisal, euthanasia, and then we get to the disposal steps. And I'm sure this group is well aware, but I'll go ahead and just let you know so that way you can correct me if something has changed, or so you can let me know so when I tell other folks what's going on if something has changed. But when we're talking about composting, there's a lot of dates and a lot of times that get confused from time to time. When we're talking about composting on a prem and we're building piles, carcass piles for composting, the dates in EMRS are generally based on the last pile where work occurs, except for the start. So when we start building the first pile, that's our scheduled start date, and that's also our actual start date. So we start putting those in. Okay? But our disposal capped date then is the date the last carcass compost pile on the prem is capped. So if we have 5 barns on a prem, barn 1, 2, 3, and 4 may already have their compost piles capped, but they're still working on 5. So we don't enter that disposal capped date in EMRS until the last compost pile is capped. So until barn 5 is capped. Likewise, when we have our temp start dates, typically our temp starts are 24 hours after the cap date and once we've reached adequate temperature. Again, it's the last pile that reaches that adequate temp start date on that premises is the date we record in the EMRS for our reporting purposes. Same thing goes in obviously with, yes, go ahead.
All right, and this is Gary. And oftentimes for most farms, that's really the way we think of it as well, is as a single census. But on some of these larger farms, we really have been looking at it in terms of groups of houses. And so, for example, we might focus on the first set of houses, and we would be interested in starting the temperature after we get that first group of houses capped, and then we're going to move on to a second group of houses, because otherwise we might be 2 weeks capped on the first group of houses that we worked on before we actually finish up the other, and so we might be missing peak temperatures and whatnot. Is there some flexibility in terms of looking at that as an entire prem versus a grouping of houses?
See, that's a great question, and I get that question quite a bit. And the reality is, by entering our last cap date, our last temp date, our last release date, we are looking at it as an entire prem. Okay, because the reality is, if barn 1 is capped and reaches its temperature and it started cooking, but we haven't capped barn 5 yet, the entire premises is not released until that last barn is complete, right? And so we do have ways to capture all the information for all the barns that's work is being conducted on, and I'm going to show that to you here in just a minute. When it comes to our sit rep and enter information into the tally sheets, we're worried about those last cap dates. That way the entire premises we know is done, since we can't release the first set of barns until the last set of barns is done as well on the same prem. Did I adequately explain myself there?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So we can actually look at groups of houses separately and differently in terms of the temperature monitoring and whether we reach our protocol or not. But ultimately, for EMRS, you're most concerned about when has that last house that was done been capped and when are those 28-day time periods over with. But we can look at smaller groups of houses.
Yes, your explanation was perfectly correct, except for when we said EMRS is most concerned with the last. That is very true when we're talking about our sit rep and being able to produce what the status is of every prem we're working on. We still do, however, need to be able to prove that, say, barn 1 be able to look at every single temperature that was recorded throughout the day, throughout the entire 28-day composting time for export purposes. And the reason I say that is, for example, Dr. Johnson a few months ago went down to Mexico City because the Mexicans were concerned about a few things and wanted to do a little bit more review to open trade back up on how we handled our HPAI incidents. And they literally would go into a prem and they'd ask, how can you confirm that, you know, a carcass pile on this premises, X premises, reached adequate temperatures throughout the entire 28 days? And so she would say, pick a barn, pick a day. And she would go in and show them. So as long as those records were maintained, you still have to verify or be able to validate down to that granular level. But for the sit rep reporting, we're only recording the last date for the last pile on the prem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Brian, that makes perfect sense. Thank you for that
Okay.
explanation.
Yep, and I'll show you how we're capturing all that here in just a few minutes once we actually get into EMRS, okay? But I wanted everybody to see this quick reference guide document, and it details out pretty clearly exactly what the dates mean that we're tracking in EMRS. And so once you have a chance to look through this thing, if you have any questions, please let us know. The other big thing we get, which I know is probably not an issue with this group, but when it comes to EMRS and our sit rep reporting, we're talking about carcass compost piles. We're not talking about manure compost piles or whatever it might be. So that's always been a little bit of confusion for some folks. But for clarity, that's why carcass is kind of outlined there and underlined. But just so you know, as you go on through this document, we then move, you know, that we also talk about burial or landfill. So we might not just be composting, but what these dates mean if a prem is burying instead of doing composting. Then we go on through C&D, start talking about our restock statuses, our control area statuses, environmental sampling, etc. So basically, this is a pretty good document from start to finish on an IP and what happens. The things to remember is it is, of course, a guidance document. For example, when it says in here to release a quarantine, that may or may not be when a state veterinarian decides to actually release a quarantine. It's just a what's typically done type thing. So keep that in mind as you read through it. But this is a very good reference material, resource material for you. One thing I want to be sure to point out here towards the bottom of the document is we start to get into some naming conventions. If you are asked to complete forms in the field and email those in to the documentation unit, it'd be very, very helpful if you went ahead and started emailing those documents to the doc unit per the naming conventions prescribed here. And they're pretty simple. It's basically prem ID underscore animal business name underscore whatever the form is that you're completing, then underscore the date. And the date needs to be in that specific format mentioned, which is year, month, day. So anyway, it's pretty simple, but if you could do that for us, that'd be helpful. Did I hear a question? Nope. Okay, good. So I'm going to close this document here real quick, and I'm going to open up one other that I've seen. If you recall, I referenced the, well, let me see if I still have it open. I might. Nope. Oh, I don't. I referenced that one document that we've seen coming into IMTs that I had saved in EMRS that I showed you. This is the other one that's kind of coming in. I'm not sure exactly where this one. Testing. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, Dr. Archer.
Yeah, we can hear you. Are you still there, Brian?
Yep, we're back. I had a blip on my end. I apologize. Maybe you guys could hear me the whole time. Something happened with my internet connection, but we're back and running, it sounds like. So anyway, I showed you a little bit earlier that other form that we see coming into EMRS, coming into the IMT, sometime filled out by folks out doing composting work. And this is the other form that we've seen, and it's a 214 form specifically for composting. And it'll work just fine too. It'd be nice if we had some consistency across incidents, but that's okay. So if you guys have decided on a particular form, that'd be great. But I just wanted you to be aware that this was out there. If you weren't, you probably are. But I'm not honestly sure where this one came from. It just started showing up, I believe, on the Indiana incident, but I'd have to remember.
Brian, this is Gary. Can I speak to that?
Yep, go ahead.
All right. So we agree with it as a group that we have been very inconsistent as how we report data as SMEs do incident command, and so we actually got together as a group last year. So prior to the end of last year, we had all sorts of different ways that we were reporting data to the incident management team. We did come up with a consistent single form that we have all agreed to use. And so that form is now included as part of our deployment package. So as we move forward, you should be seeing just a single ICS 214 that is consistent coming to you.
That's perfect, Gary. Could I ask a favor? Could you send me a copy of that? And I would go ahead and load that up in the training materials HPAI Toolkit that I showed you at the start, and I'd remove the other forms that are there. That way it's there for anybody who needs it, and you can reference it if you ever need to go grab one.
Yeah, I can send that to you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so that answers that, and I'm going to go ahead and close this. So now we're just back to the home page in EMRS. And what I want to do now is I want to show you what we capture in EMRS specific to composting so you can see the key information that we need to gather and why. So I'm going to go to the disease management application, and I'm going to scroll down and look at what's called the tally sheets. Okay. And what the tally sheets are is a way for the DRO. The DRO is the only one that can enter information in the tally, but the tally sheets are used to capture current information, whether that be reported from field investigators, from company representatives that have done work via conference call or whatever, or by our folks that have done work. The tallies are used to create our sit rep. So I'm going to use one here. This is actual data out of Indiana from the incident we had back there a little while ago. And when you scroll down this tally sheet, you can see that it just kind of has a synopsis of all the work that's been done. So it starts out with what type of prem it was, what the diagnosis is, when the quarantine was delivered, when it was confirmed, and the accession numbers, all that good stuff, how many prems are around it. Then we get down to the euthanasia and disposal section. Euthanasia and disposal will talk about the planned start, method, company, who's doing the work, the euthanasia party and the status, start dates, etc. Then we get down into disposal. And you can see that it's the exact same dates and information that I showed you in that quick reference guide. So we have a planned start date, which of course is the date that we anticipate starting to build our piles, who's going to do the work, what the method is. In this prem, it happened to be indoor composting, what the status is as of today, and as of right now, of course, is complete. The actual date it was started, how many we're disposing of, what percentage is done, the date it was capped. So again, this date's going to be the date the last pile on that premises was capped, because we're tracking towards eventual release of premises or eventual getting back to business, continuity business, and restock. So we have our cap date. Our start date should be at least 24 hours later than that for our temps. Turn date's going to be estimated 14 days later. Disposal planned in will be estimated 28 days later. Disposal actual complete date, and then the date we have our release letter, okay, as well as the name of the SME that was doing the work on that prem. So what the DRO does is the DRO will come in daily to this record and update the number disposed to date, the percent disposed, and put in any comments that they want to put down here in this section at the bottom. So this is literally just a snapshot. You note it does not capture any of the hard information that we were discussing with Gary a little bit ago about, actual temps in barn 1 or whatever it might be. That is all captured on the E&D form in EMRS for the investigation. So once again, the tally sheet is only used by the DRO to capture current relevant information, and then quality control is performed against this record versus what's actually in the E&D record for this investigation to help make sure everything jives, and then we produce a sit rep with a couple clicks. So with that being said, let's go take a look at this one and the E&D record and see what it says in the investigation. So to get there, I just click on the investigation tab. The investigation for this same premises opens. I'm going to look at the E&D record, and you can see that it's completed, but I'm going to go ahead and open it up. Now when I scroll down the E&D record, you're going to see that's basically a duplicate of what you saw on the tally. Make it a little bit bigger so we can see it a little bit better. Okay. And when we get down here to the euthanasia information, then we go right into the composting information. So the disposal method is composting, our scheduled start date, our actual start date, who's doing the work, the cap date, the temp start date, turn date, and the disposal scheduled end date, and the date it was actually done. Okay, so here's the work that's done across there. But what's good about this is when we come down and look under the notes section, this is where we get into all of the records that were actually completed and saved. All these attachments that you see down here. So we start seeing temp logs by date, temp post graphs, a compost map, feed data, and then we get back to the compost approval form, compost logs, and then finally a release form. So as you guys do the work each and every day on the prem, or as you go out and verify with the owner his temp logs or whatever it may be, and as you report those back into the doc unit then scans and attaches them right here. So back when I was discussing earlier, when Dr. Cami Johnson went down to Mexico and they said, how can you prove that this farm hit the temperature that they said they reached each and every day, we can just open up this compost temp log and take a look at all the records that are captured there and look at the temperatures that recorded, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then when we finally get to the release form, we can open it up. And now we've got the actual Indiana Board of Animal Health release form and the date that it was done and all the work that was done there to justify release. So, long way of saying, all of the hard copy documents that you capture and keep are recorded and sent into the doc unit and are attached under the C&D record. The synopsis or summary information for the entire prem, those dates are kept here for our situational reporting. Okay, so that begs a question. When you go out every day and you do this work every day, when there is a change in one of these dates, let's say barn 3 didn't quite cook well enough and we're having to do some remixing and adding some water, and it is adjusting our release date for that pile. How does that get captured in EMRS to know that we're going to have to change this? And what that gets down to is your 214s that we were discussing a little bit ago that you're sending in. Those 214s, we need to be sure and identify on them when something is critical to update the tally sheet. And by that I mean these main dates for compost release on the tally sheet. So if you're going out there and you're just verifying temperature logs and everything looks good, and you're sending your tally sheet saying everything looked good today when I talked to Mr. Joe Smith on his prem, that's okay. We're going to capture that record. We're going to put it in the E&D record, and it's going to be locked there. But if you go out and say, barn 5 compost pile wasn't cooking well, they're going to have to rework it, and we're going to change our disposal scheduled end date to be 5 days later than now. That is new information for the tally sheet. It's going to have to update our disposal scheduled end date. So somewhere on that tally sheet, we need to be sure to identify that, so that way the doc unit can let the DRO know that he or she is going to have to update the tally record or these end dates. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Brian, this is Gary. That makes sense to me.
Okay, good. Let me show you real quick how the DRO is going to track that. Okay.
Brian, can I ask you a question while you're pulling that up?
Of course.
On that initial sheet that you showed us, that initial landing page, and when it talked about the SME, it showed Mark King being the SME on that site,
Okay.
which is true. my question is there an easy way to see a history or a summary? So, for example, on this site, I'm the SME that started that site. Dean Ross maybe was there after me, and then Mark King finished it up. So if there was a question about an activity or whatnot that occurred, it just seems like it'd be nice to say, well, maybe Mark King will know it. Maybe Mark wasn't there during that initial section, so maybe I should look at that first SME. And I understand we can go back to the daily reports, but is there a way to sort of summarize or show that history of SME presence on the site?
Only if we record it in the comments section, Gary, as to who was there as time went on. The best way is going to be like if there was an issue on, I don't know, let's say January 19th, and we need to see what happened on January 19th, would be to open up that report, see who completed it, and contact them. Like you said, we can go to that E&D record and open it. We can keep a running total if we want in any one of these comments sections. That just requires us to continue to enter them. And again, the tally sheet is as of right now, what's the situation. So this compost SME is the SME as of the day the DRO or whomever on the IMT is looking at this record, so they know who to call right away. When we go back to that E&D record, let me just do that real quick. Okay, you'll notice through here that we don't keep the composting SME here because that's going to change over time. If we wanted to, we could list them in the disposal comments. It's absolutely no problem, and we can set that as a protocol if that is needed. The other way to do it, of course, would be just to, come down here to the notes section and pull up the appropriate form for the time frame and see who completed it and call them and put them in that way. In addition to that, even though we can also attach all the records we want as what's shown here, but anywhere in EMRS where there's a notes section, which is on every single page, you can type a novel if you want in there to list different information. We try to not do that unless it's an exam page and it's an investigator typing exam findings or whatever, because it can become burdensome for people to read through large bits of information trying to find a small bit. But if we wanted to put that type of synopsis information on an E&D record, it'd be easy to do right here in this notes section.
Yeah,
I'm
not suggesting you need to do that. I was just curious because there's been a few times that I've gotten a call from an SME who came in after me and said, hey, I had a call from the IMT and they were asking this and I don't know. And it made me think that maybe there's not a clear way to identify, the history of the SMEs on the site. But it sounds like there's a way to do that. It's just not shown on that initial page, but there certainly is a way to do that.
Yeah, and the best way would be go into the date question and just pull up the form and see who completed it and call that person. But yeah, that's something we can think about. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just go back to that tally. We were just talking about that 214 and being sure to let the DR know or the doc unit leader know when something has occurred on the prem that's going to change one of these dates. And that may be, today the last compost pile was capped. I mean, that's a critical piece of information as we're going through a prem to get this date in there. And so what we've now got in EMRS and what we were not using in Indiana was a way to attach these 214 daily logs right here into the system. Okay, and obviously in this one in Indiana, like I said, there aren't any, but the doc unit would attach it right here. And right here in this column that says includes updates to the tally sheet, they have a radio button they click that says yes or no based on the information that you've provided on that hard copy form. And so if it says yes, that automatically cues the DRO to read that 214, come in here into their initial report, and make the appropriate change based on the information you reported down here in the disposal information. Okay. But what I'm getting to is it's on those tallies, it is critical that, or I'm sorry, on your 214s, it is critical that you include information and state plainly somewhere there's a new date for the tally sheet or new date for reporting or new date for release of this premises. Okay, does that make sense? And when we start uploading them in here, and I could go into training and show you a few in training that actually has a bunch of them listed out and makes it a little bit more clear. But it'll have the date, yes or no, and then a brief comment section. So it could say on 124 of 17, yes, it's an update to the tally sheet, just a yes button, yes word here. The comment might say, last compost pile on the premises was capped. That's all it needs to say in the comments that the DRO that the doc unit leader would enter here based on that 214 that came in. then the DRO could click on a link that's in this column and actually see that attachment of the actual scan 214 of what your field folks wrote in the field to verify that. Then they just simply go right back up here and update the information as said on your report. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, perfect, great. So those are kind of the highlights that I wanted to show you as far as the information that we need to capture and why we capture it in EMRS and where and how. The last thing I'll show you, which doesn't really pertain to you as far as your jobs go on the IMT, but it does pertain to you as far as getting this information in real time and current and accurate. And the way we've got EMRS set up now is it's pretty slick, is using this tally sheet for all aspects of the incident. So from the start here all the way through E&D, C&D, and through the completion section of control zones and our statuses and quarantine releases, all that good stuff, is we can now create the sit rep directly out of the tally sheet, provided the information is current and real time and accurate. So in EMRS, all we need to do now is come down here to our enterprise reporting piece, and this is a situation unit leader position job. They come to reports. They'll scroll down here to these are all the different canned reports we have in EMRS. But when we come down here to the situation report, they'll click it and open it. And I won't do it right now because it takes just a little bit of time to load it because it's so big. But I did it prior. And this is what is generated. And so this is the information that the SIT unit leader can just literally copy and paste or export as an Excel spreadsheet and put right into EMRS. And so utilizing those tally sheets, you can see here that we've got disposal information captured. And so at a glance, we can now take a look at the status of each one of these IPs or dangerous contacts, whatever the situation may be, and where they are with their cap date, their start date, their turn date, disposal date, and their final status. And it does that for every section within operations, so it's pretty slick and pretty handy. But just wanted you to be aware that the information you're turning in is vital. It needs to be turned in as real time and as close to real time as possible. The tally now allows us to update that quickly, even if the hard copy documents have not quite made it in to back it up. But then once they do, we of course trust but verify type situation where we perform QA/QC from the tally against the forms you submitted versus what's entered on that E&D record. And then the ultimate product here is the situation report that's generated with just literally a couple clicks and used for reporting across the nation and locally for just the IMT. So that's kind of the highlights I had planned. It didn't go into much detail. I kind of stayed right on the composting line. If there's anything else you'd like me to go into more detail or explain again, I'm happy to do that. If there's something different you'd like to know about EMRS, I'm happy to do that too. Just try to kind of give you an idea of where we are headed. You may have heard about the tough pad tablets that we've got out in Fort Collins. We've got about, I think there's 39 of them. Not positive of that number, but I think that's what it is. We're currently migrating those towards 2016, which is the new version of EMRS, the new look you're going to see here in just about a month. What's going to change in that new version is right now we have the application areas over here on the left and all these entities above. Well, you know, Microsoft and all these other companies are moving towards tablets and touch screens. And you can imagine it'd be kind of hard to touch these little bitty entities. So what they've done is they've moved these applications at the top of the page. And when you tap disease management up here at the top, a palette opens up with all the entities, and then you can just tap the entity. Works really slick for doing field type work. Those tablets right now, we're setting them up with what's called the initial contact report to be able to use them for backyard surveillance and foreign animal disease investigations and that kind of thing. Then the next enhancements we're going to push to it are going to be doing epi surveillance interviews and being able to, well, let me just take a step back. Those initial contact reports for FAD investigations and backyard surveillance, the way it works is when you complete that on the tablet, and then it's literally a one-page type form, and then when you upload that into EMRS, so you can do the work on the tablet without having internet connection. When you get to the hotel or to a McDonald's or Starbucks or whatever has internet, and you want to upload it, then you just send it up in EMRS, and it automatically creates the prem business investigation exam, which completes it then, as well as creates the lab sub and the specimens and submits it to the lab, all within EMRS with just a couple clicks. So it's very handy. It basically has removed the data entry side back in the IMT for all that type of activity once we get it released and coming out. Then our next enhancements are going to be to do things like epi interviews, where they can be auto-loaded up. And eventually we'll get to doing things like composting reports, to where you can enter in your composting data right there on a tablet in the field and upload it into EMRS when you have internet connection and without any further data entry or going any other routes like that. So that's kind of the direction that we're headed. So just wanted you to be aware of that. We're still a ways off for being able to do it for composting. Like I said, the first priority is to get it ready for backyard surveillance and FAD investigations, and then we'll start moving on it, building on it from there. So that's what's coming.
Well, Brian, this is Gary. I'm excited about that possibility for the composting data, because quite frankly, the time that we're in the field, it's really difficult for us to communicate that data to the incident management team, and to have a way that as soon as we get data, we can, upload that up into EMRS would be awesome. So that sounds exciting.
Yep, we'll be getting there for long. It's going to be really quick. Hopefully within about a month, we'll have it for FAD investigations, routine, and backyard surveillance activities on an incident. But then we'll keep stepping it towards all the other aspects. So we'll get there. Any general questions about the composting and EMRS and how we track it, and how we kind of jive with getting the field information into the documentation unit and getting it entered and that kind of thing? Is there anything that I can answer that I didn't adequately cover, or anything I didn't cover that you would like to visit about?
So, Brian, I will say that on the chat box, we do have a question, and I don't know if you can get to that easily or if I should just read that to you.
No. Is there a place to record amendment type and amount used when outside composting is required? You're going to have to explain to me what we're referring to by amendment type and amount used.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
When you're composting layer facilities, there's usually not bedding available to do composting properly. So you have to bring in outside amendments, whether that's finished compost or wood shavings or some such. And usually have important information, maybe more than the amount of birds that you're composting, that material. And just to have a record of that added amendment material would be important, I think.
Sure. So that's going to be in your composting report that we scan and attach, and so it'll be there. If that is something that's needed to be easily pulled for reporting purposes, then we can add a field into EMRS if it's required and needed. If that's just something there to use to support if somebody comes back and asks, what or how much did you use, then that would be captured in that standard PDF report that we scan and attach.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
So questions from the entire group, because I know generally speaking, EMRS is something that we don't work with on a routine basis, but we constantly are asked questions from our bosses in order to be responsive to EMRS. So don't know much about it, but we have to supply data to it. I know there's lots of questions. I know I have some. Other questions from the group?
Yeah, this is Dean Ross. This question isn't necessarily for you, Doctor, but this is a sort of a general question for Gary and Lori, and I don't know who else would want to answer. Right now, it appears we have two documents that we're filling out in the field. The 214 document that's in the composting package, and then there's that other document that he showed earlier that covers the starting and stopping dates. Am I correct in thinking that those are the two documents right now that are to be turned in on a daily basis?
Well, Dean, this is Gary. Let me just say that I have not seen that table before as an actual document. That's data that we all collect as SMEs because it's critical, and we collect it in different ways. So, but it's clearly something that's being reported into EMRS. So I guess what I'm thinking, Dean, and I'd love to get your thoughts and everybody else's thoughts, I'd like to see that as a physical document that we have when we're deployed, so that we're collecting that data in the same format that ultimately the incident command is going to be putting it back into EMRS. So that was the first I've physically seen that document, but clearly that's data that we do collect.
Okay, and I'm exactly where you are, Gary, and that's fine. I just was trying to recall and figure out what everything that we were going to be needing to be asked to do currently. And the other question I had related to that is that 214 document that we devised, is that a live document or is that a dead document? I can't remember. In other words, is that a fillable document?
I recall that it is fillable, but quite frankly, we developed it, and I haven't been deployed since, so I haven't used it actually.
Right.
So I was going to say that 100%, but I'm pretty sure it's fillable. If not, we need to make sure that it is.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, so how are we going to get this in people's hands when we're 20 miles away from the incident command? And you know, it isn't like we're going to scan it and send it. It needs to be something in an electronic form that we can fill out and send it to them.
Yeah, so my understanding was that that's data that we're going to collect, and then each evening as we go and prepare that information, we'll then shoot it to whoever the disposal lead is on the incident. So again, exactly like you said, we'll have to fill that out on a computer or something and then shoot that to the incident management team.
That's all I wanted to know. I was just trying to recall, it's been a year, how all that worked, and it was a little fuzzy. Thank you.
So while we're talking about that, those 214s and that tally sheet, I went ahead and logged into training real quick just to show you how those 214s come in and how they'll be now tracked in EMRS specific for composting and case manager type work. Okay, the IMT 214s are going to be kept somewhere else because they're not premises level documents, right? But anyway, so this is in training, and I put in a couple of dummy type 214s to show you how that'll be tracked, to show you where your data is going to come. So here I am on Daffy Ducks Chickens Animal Business. Here's a prem in a test environment in the training, and here's my tally sheet. When I click on the 214 daily logs, you can see here's a bunch of 214s that have come in that are prem level 214s specific to Daffy Ducks chickens. Okay, and you can see that the first one came in on 6/13. Does it include updates to the tally? Yes, and euthanasia was complete. Then we had two other times a case manager or whoever visited to do whatever type work. They recorded that information on a 214 that came in specific for Daffy Ducks chickens, but it did not on the 14th and 15th. There was no updates to the tally sheet, just an update to euthanasia. So it might be any number of different things. But then on 6/16, we do have an update now that's required for the tally sheet, disposal start date, and a couple compost piles are being built in barn 1. So this is the type of information that you'd be writing on those tallies that the doc unit would be responsible for getting this summary information put in for the DRO to then update that tally for the SIT report to be current. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. So then what the DRO would do is they just click on this link for this one that says update to the tally. Here's what the doc unit filled out, and then the bottom, it's not attached here because this is training and practice. This is where your actual 214 would be scanned and attached for the DRO to take a look at, see what you wrote. Then they would just simply close this document, come back here to the initial report, and put in the appropriate date under E&D based on whatever you said occurred. Okay, so that's how the documentation flow is going to work and allow us to keep the tally and the situation current. But again, it all hinges on your 214 and somewhere clearly specifying on there does this 214 contain information that is required to update the tally sheet? And that's kind of our critical piece that we just need to be aware, because the doc unit's going to be sitting there entering stuff in, and that may be people we trained, off the street or from the local state or whomever, just to do basic data entry. And so it needs to be clear coming in the field whether or not this should be a yes or a no, because the DRO is going to be the one that actually reads it and determines what the date change is or whatever.
Okay, are there other questions from anybody in the group?
So this is Dean again, and this is my question, I guess. Well, I'll aim it at you, Gary, even though you may not be the person to answer it. So listening to the description here of there's a certain set items that are being asked for us to report when there are certain changes made. So do we need, for our own purposes, a reminder sheet or an extra list, or do we need to amend the 214 that we've been using to make sure that the information that they want to know for their tally sheet here, or when it changes, does that need to be specifically asked or checklisted or something so that it does pop up for them?
So that's an excellent question for the group. I guess what I was thinking is that table that you could use to document the status of each site, which again, Dean, I know you've created your own, as have most of us. Now that we know exactly what it is that they're using within the incident in EMRS, if we had a copy of that, we would certainly keep track of that, because that's what we do and that's what we're responsible for. And to me, anytime we change the status of a premise from compost started to windrow capped, that to me is a indicator that there's a trigger and a change in status, and we should make a note of that on our 214 would be my thought. It seems like that would trigger it for me, but maybe others in the group would feel like we need to have some other sort of trigger. Certainly it's up for discussion. And I do apologize that Lori is doing a training today, so she's not available. Certainly that would be actually a question that she would ultimately decide upon. But I'd like to hear the thoughts of anyone else in the group. So Brian, when I send you that 214 that we have, I would appreciate it if you could send me this document as well, and I'll send that out to the entire group.
Sure, I'm happy to send it to you. And the other thing to remember is that anybody who has access to EMRS has access to that document all the time. You just log in, go to the home page, go to the training materials, which is the entity you're going to use, and right here on the HPAI Toolkit, click and open, and you'll scroll down here and you'll find it. Where is it at? You'll find it both as a fillable document and as a non-fillable document. Now I must have blown over it somewhere. And this is where I'll put the 214 that you send me. There it is. Disposal inspection report non-fillable and disposal inspection report fillable. So everybody on the call that has access to EMRS can get in there and take a look. And in fact, I'd encourage you to come into this HPAI toolkit and just look through the entire toolkit. Specifically look at these two documents as well as the quick reference guide document, because it's a good overall document. It kind of gives a good snapshot from start to finish. But there's a lot of information in this toolkit I think would be of benefit to folks. And with that being said, Gary, when you send me your 214, we'll upload it here in the training materials. But what I'll do is I'll put a date on it, and it'll only be current as of that date. So if you guys end up changing that 214 in a month or 6 months or whatever, right, you'll need to let me know new copy so I can delete the old one and put in the current. We only try to keep current documents in this toolkit. So even though you'll see some dates that might be old, that's okay. They haven't been changed. You know, for example, this one hasn't been changed since June 17th of 2016. Otherwise, this would be disappeared and there'd be a new one in its place.
And so, Brian, I will say that we are a very unique group. We do work very, very closely with APHIS, but most of us are outside of APHIS, and actually many of us are actually outside of the state Department of Agriculture. So most of us, I wouldn't say most, probably I might be most of us, I don't know, don't actually have access to EMRS. So you know, we don't have that opportunity.
Okay. Well, I did not realize that, and I very much appreciate you inviting me on this call then, because it gave me the opportunity to show you the kind of the critical key points that we need to capture for the sit rep, and so that's very good.
So are there other calls or other questions for Brian? It's a good opportunity for us to learn from him and to get some of our questions answered. Questions from the group? Well, Brian, thank you very much. We really appreciate it. It's been very, very useful, and we'll look forward to continuing the dialogue.
Great. Sounds good. If you'd send me an email with that 214 when you guys have it, if it's ready, that's great. Or when you got it finalized, then I'll just respond to you, Gary, and send you a copy of that document I showed a little bit ago.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. You have a great rest of the week.
All right. Thank you. And I guess since we have a few minutes left on the call,